My name is John Kelly. I'm a researcher at the IEEE-RAS laboratory at Naval Air Warfare Center Aircraft Division, and in collaboration with Daniel Lofaro and Donald Sofge from the United States Naval Research Laboratory, I am here to present our research on persistent area coverage for swarms utilizing deployment entropy with potential fields. Our objective for this research was to develop an effective method of persistent area coverage that could be implemented on a multi-agent system, such as a group of NRL's lighter-than-air aerial agent, or LTA-3 platforms, using a decentralized control structure for use cases such as search and rescue, surveillance, target tracking, and more. Deployment entropy is a measure established by researchers Li and Zhang at the University of Electronic Science and Technology of China that expresses the uniformity of the deployment among a number of regions in an area. This requires you to divide your area into a number of these smaller regions to express that uniformity. Researchers Zheng Jie and Wei adapted this deployment entropy measure for a strategy to distribute micro-aerial vehicles, or MAVs, across an area of interest. Here are the formulas that you would use to calculate deployment entropy, where deployment entropy is H. Essentially, what you're doing is you're taking a look at those smaller regions you've divided your area up into, looking at how many agents populate each region, and you're calculating how uniform the amount of agents per region across your entire area is. The original work establishes a two-level redeployment strategy for utilizing deployment entropy in area coverage. The scenario is a number of agents have been deployed into your area of interest, and you've already divided your area up into your regions and your subregions. You iterate through your regions one at a time, redeploying agents. Agents redeploy to neighboring regions with lower ratios of agents to area one at a time. After each redeployment, your deployment entropy is recalculated. This is your global redeployment phase. This iteration repeats until a desired deployment entropy value is reached. After this value is reached, your regions are divided up into your subregions, and the iteration repeats on a local level. This is the local redeployment phase until a second final deployment entropy value is reached. The strategy is well suited to decentralized control because agents only need to know their own location and only need to be able to communicate with agents in neighboring regions and subregions. Here's an example two-level redeployment scenario with 36 agents. All of the agents start out in one of the larger regions, and then during the global redeployment phase, they are redeployed to the larger regions, and then the local redeployment phase begins, and they are redeployed to the smaller regions. The researchers established a set of 5 rules for achieving maximum deployment entropy when utilizing the strategy. Rule 1 is dividing the area of interest up into regions based on a grid-based partitioning system. Rule 2 is every region or subregion can only interact with its neighbors. So agents in one region can only interact with agents in the neighboring region, and so on into the subregion. Rule 3 is that MAVs can only relocate to a region or subregion with a lower ratio than its current region. Rule 4 is for a MAV to move between two regions or subregions, the difference between their numbers of MAVs must be greater than 1. This basically prevents two regions passing one agent back and forth forever. And the last rule is only one MAV can be selected to move for each region for each iteration. Based on pseudocode from the original research, we created a script that generates a simulated deployment based on given user inputs. The user inputs the number of agents, the dimensions of the total area of interest, how the regions and subregions are divided, what region the agents start in, and goal deployment entropy values for both redeployment phases, the global redeployment phase and the local redeployment phase. This is a 100 agent redeployment simulation in an area based off of a real-life testing area that we had access to. You can see that the number of agents in each subregion following the local redeployment phase are roughly equivalent. However, an undesirable trend is starting to emerge. The undesirable trend that's starting to emerge is this corner clustering effect. Essentially, what's happening is when an agent is redeployed from one region or subregion to another, the agent that is chosen to move is the one that is closest to the center of the destination region or subregion. This tends to leave the agents that don't move left behind in a corner. This is especially noticeable in simulations with larger numbers of agents, like this 100 agent simulation. So even though the distribution of agents into the regions or subregions is roughly equivalent, they're not being as effectively or efficiently utilized. We're not getting the most coverage out of them that we possibly could. So how can we resolve this? Had the idea of using potential fields as a method of increasing the spread of the agents following the local redeployment phase. Initially, we thought we would just implement a repulsive potential field between the agents, but later we also ended up using an attractive potential field, something I will discuss a little bit more about in just a little bit. Here you can see the diagrams that give you an idea of how these potential fields work. Basically, they just generate a repulsive or attractive force between objects. You can see we used these formulas to basically just generate a position change based on how strong or weak the potential forces between agents were. As I just mentioned, we initially hypothesized that a repulsive field between agents would increase the spread. However, a repulsive field alone actually just pushed agents into subregion boundaries without significantly increasing spread. They tend to just push each other against the walls or into the corners. Seeing this, we had the idea to do a two-phase potential field method, where basically first we would have an attractive field toward the center of the subregions and then a repulsive field between the agents. The results of our potential field strategy. Each row is a different 50 agent redeployment. The one on the bottom has sensor areas visualized. As you can see, after potential fields, there's a much more even spread. And on the bottom row, you can see that the amount of area covered by the sensing areas is larger. Here's another example, except this time with a 100 agent redeployment. You can see, due to there being more agents, that clustering into corners effect is larger, and you can also see how much more even that spread is and that sensor area coverage is following the potential fields. For our statistical analysis of the results, we're going to be looking at the mean distance of the closest 6 agents to each agent. This is because of the ideal case where all agents are equidistant from each other, this crystalline structure here you can see in figure 8. You can see a number of statistical plots comparing different simulations before and after implementing potential fields. What's important to note on this slide is that the mean of mean distances between agents appears to stay the same before and after implementing potential fields. However, the standard deviation is initially lesser after implementing potential fields, indicating that even though the average distance between agents is the same, there is more uniformity with regards to the spread, which is something that's desirable. However, an interesting trend emerges here where there is a crossover where the standard deviation actually becomes higher after implementing potential fields. Investigating this trend more closely, we found that manually tuning down the repulsive field strength from 0.5 to 0.1 actually moved this bend, this crossover point in the standard deviation of mean distances further over to the right, which it seems to indicate that having a lesser field strength will give you a more uniform spread for higher numbers of agents. Overall, from our work, we found that for a 2-level redeployment method of area coverage utilizing deployment entropy, the implementation of 2 potential field phases yields a greater, more uniform spread of agents. It yields greater area coverage and more efficient usage of agent resources. We also found that for larger numbers of agents, lower potential field strengths may be needed to ensure a more uniform